Joining me to discuss the historic ramifications of the Boston mayoral race and to help me pronounce one of the candidates' names and the issues at stake is CEO and co-founder of the Lazu Group, Malia Lazu. My dear friend, I am so glad to have you back on Amplified and really enjoyed the article that you just wrote about all of this. And I want to just jump in by acknowledging that state and local level politics just don't always get national recognition. And so I would love for you to break down for all of our viewers why this race is so important and we need to be paying attention.
Thank you. And Aisha, it's always great to be on your show, but to especially talk about Boston politics, because I feel like we're often seen as this space for Democrats and, we don't really get a lot of attention, but really there's quite a few changes happening here. And just to give some context for those listening, and I should say it's Annissa Essaibi George is how you pronounce her name.
Essaibi George. Annissa Essaibi George.
Essaibi George. Yep. And, Boston has had, up until Marty Walsh, 5 mayors in the last 100 years, where we're not someone who changes power often. And most recently, when Mayor Walsh went on to become the Secretary of Labor, I think, right, is what he went on to do. We got our first woman and first African-American, first Black mayor in Mayor Janey. And we just had a hard-fought primary race where there was a couple of Black women. It was primarily all Black women or women of color, I should say, in the race. And we ended up with Michelle Wu and Annissa Essaibi George. And it really is a textbook old Boston, new Boston. Annissa is moderate. She's come out very recently as a woman of color. And she's supported a lot by the police, by real estate, who's actually been running some ads about Michelle Wu supporting defund the police. And Michelle is not a Boston native. She's from Chicago, which is something else that's come up. Is Boston ready to elect someone who wasn't born and bred here and sounding like they're from Goodwill Hunting? And so Michelle really represents this new Boston, and is, really supporting what the newer residents of Boston, what the younger residents are talking about. She's talking about free transit. She's talking about equity work. She's talking about arts and culture. And all of that is what we want Boston to be known for, and not just our elite institutions.
But hold on, Malia. I want to go back to something. I want to go back to something you just said, and not to throw shade, but I just want to make sure that I am listening to what you were saying. Did you just say that Annissa just came out as a person of color?
Yes. So her father is Turkish, and she... I know.
I was looking at the picture and went to bottom when you were saying that, and I'm like, so now what we doing that no Black women made it through the primary, so now we got to come out as a woman of color to be competitive?
She did it before, Yeah, I mean, in her defense, she did it when she chose to run for mayor, so that was during the primary or before the primary, But I think what her unusual statement highlights is just how much things have changed. That a woman who can, by all intents and purposes, pass for being white and has been living as a white woman for years now feels the importance of recognizing her father's heritage. And that's something that, as someone who's lived in Boston for a while and done a lot of work here, it tickles me, and it's very surprising.
Okay, so I want to make sure that we get to, I don't know why I just think this is hilarious, but I want to get to the article that you wrote earlier this week about some of the real issues in this race that matter. And you make the case that real estate could be, the whole issue around real estate could be central in this race, and that it's often not a conversation where we talk about equity and diversity. And so I want you to bring that to us here at Amplified and talk about how can real estate be a tool to create more equitable outcomes for Black and brown and queer people and all the folks who are checking the other box, but we still the majority, so we won't be other for long.
That's right. We still know who we're talking about. No, but I think that we forget the just the huge influence that development has on a culture, on a space, on a city, on a town, on a society, right? When you hear things like we're bringing in casinos and that's going to create jobs, or we're building more luxury housing, are we building affordable housing? All of these questions end up getting influenced quite a bit by developers, and we here in Boston have a very strong development culture, and we have a very tight relationship between the city and developers. And so I think right now what we're seeing, Millennial Partners, which is a large developer out here in Boston, is one of the large backers of the super PAC that's actually running some anti-Michelle Wu commercials talking about defunding the police. And I decided to write that piece because it just struck me as strange that someone who's in real, a company that's in real estate would choose defund the police as one of their, as one of their ads. And so it got me thinking, like, why is development so scared of equity and of change? When we think about any cool place to hang out, it's because it's equitable, right? Jane Jacobs, an urban planning philosopher, says that neighborhoods are made by, musicians, right? Artists, the LGBTQ community,
cool
right?
kids.
Like the cool kids, right? This is who makes up a neighborhood. And, I think Boston, that wants to be its like own version of Brooklyn so bad, like really doesn't understand that a lot of the reason why Brooklyn was cool was because of the decades of the people who lived there before. And so, I really just wanted to ask our developers, many of whom are, clients of mine and I work with, but really to just have a moment to reflect, to say, how do we not fight this, but how do we actually come together and become part of the solution? Because at the end of the day, the conversations we're having aren't even about us, Aisha, and we're not older, right? Like we're still young, but they're really about the future. So why don't we let the future lead? And no one's not going to make money in Boston off development because we're doing things differently here and more equitably in this city. And I just wanted to remind all of us of that.
I got 30 seconds, and I wonder if either of these candidates are proposing any policy solutions that might bridge some of the gaps that are coming up around the equity piece in development.
Yes, both candidates have platforms around equity and development. I think what I really wanted to pull out in this piece is that, that the question between new Boston and old Boston is really about who actually understands what it takes to bring Boston into the future. And I think, people who are over romanticizing, the Boston accent and this old Boston, it's really going to do us a disservice to be able to be a city that is desirable for future talent. And so I think that there's two candidates. They all have platforms, but really we want to look at new ideas and a larger vision. And to be quite honest, I think Michelle Wu holds that.
All right, to the future, we will keep watching. Thank you so much for coming back to the show, Malia. It is always a pleasure. Appreciate you.